I don't know if I've ever shared this with anyone, but I remember my dad yelling at my mother because she couldn't get out of bed. And of course there were mission people telling her, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be like this. And that here she was, they had committed their lives to being in Africa to carry the message.
Right.
And people are telling her she just needed more faith. But I remember my dad, just in frustration, yelling at my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember grabbing my BB gun and running into the room and pointing it at my dad and screaming at him to stop. And my dad just came across the room and knocked it and took it out of my hands.
Yeah, right.
Right?
It's a BB gun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a BB gun.
Yeah. But the intent was all the same.
But the intent was the same. I wanted to protect my mother. Someone handed me a joint. I did it. I don't even know that I really got, high.
But you broke precedent.
But it was the beginning.
Would it have been unthinkable before then?
No, absolutely not. Wouldn't have been unthinkable. It was just the opportunity.
Did you feel like if my dad would see me, was it an exercise in rebellion too, at least?
I don't
in
think
part?
there was any of that. I just wanted to get it on.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Okay, cool.
And of course they played Born to Be Wild. And I went, this is the start.
There you go.
This is the start, right? What I should have listened to was when they played Goddamn the Pusher Man. But I missed that part of the conversation, okay? And from that time on, and within 3 months, I had tried any and everything that was available, either legally or illegally, at the time, okay?
Right.
I had tried it, and I had reached a point where I was using every day something. It didn't matter what. And I thought I had done enough. And I probably had about 13 years clean or something. And I went to my wife and I said, I just want you to know how much I regret and how sorry I am for all the pain and harm I caused in your life. And she said, thank you. You've never said that. Because I thought that the amends I was making by living different were enough.
The admission of wrongdoing by saying you were wrong.
Yes.
Is so powerful and so often not something that's exercised by others. One of the most powerful things that I've learned in the process is to, and we talk about the 10 step, talks about prompt. Nobody ever really defined what promptly is.
My sponsor did. He said, as promptly as you are able, as promptly as you become willing.
It's neat. We, one of the process here is we get an opportunity to have a conversation before we have a conversation so that we can align ourselves, emotionally, spiritually for, wherever we end up going with this. And, and I appreciate, the conversation that we had beforehand. You know what I mean? I appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty.
Thank you.
Let's pronounce your last name. It's Kaskela, right?
Kaskela.
Kaskela. So Dave and I know each other. We met in the church basement. It's neat. We, one of the process here is we get an opportunity to have a conversation before we have a conversation so that we can align ourselves, emotionally, spiritually for, wherever we end up going with this. And, and I appreciate, the conversation that we had beforehand. You know what I mean? I appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty.
Thank
you. Let's pronounce your last name. It's Kaskela, right?
Kaskela.
Kaskela. So Dave and I know each other. We met in the church basement, more or less, right? So, the neat thing about the recovery journey for me is the opportunity to meet many different types of people. And frankly, where we meet people and we get to know them, little snapshots of people, little snippets of, of their participation in their recovery, their process, their journey, often only gives us just a little brief taste of who people really are. And you had mentioned it, you and I spoke last night. You had mentioned that, it wasn't more than maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago that we got an opportunity after a meeting to go sit in a diner and just break bread. And, that conversation ended up being far longer and far deeper than I think either of us expected.
I think so.
And I got to learn some more about your background than maybe I would have realized otherwise. And that's a beautiful thing about the process is as you continue to peel back on people, you get to learn many things about them that you never would have known otherwise. And, and some really cool things came out of that conversation. So let's start with that, right? So, because where we were there, I'm just going to kind of breeze back into, your history, your background a little bit, specifically your childhood and those type of things, because that was really compelling for me. Frankly, it was like one of those reasons why I thought to myself, he'd be a good guy at some point to, see if I can corner him and get him on the show. So now let's go back to childhood. So you're originally from here, but was it Philadelphia or New York? Where were you?
So I was born in Hartford, Connecticut.
That's what it was. Okay.
And then my parents moved to Glenside, Montgomery County, when I was very young.
Okay.
So we lived there until I was almost 6 years old.
Okay.
At which point my mom and dad, who had been preparing for their journey,
right,
a big change in their journey, to go to East Africa, Kenya specifically, as missionaries, decided that the time was right. And so in January of 1957, we got on a boat and sailed to England. I had my 6th birthday on the boat. I didn't tell you this before, but kids just don't realize, right? I sent a note to the captain of the Ivernia was the name of the ship. It's my birthday. Could you drop anchor and come to my birthday party? Well, of course, he couldn't drop anchor.
Right.
But he sent me the cufflinks off of his coat. And, or not cufflinks, but the buttons.
Right.
And, a cake and a card for my birthday. It was one of those special things, man, when you're 6 years old.
It's a big deal.
But the funny thing is that the self-centeredness from when I was 6 years old, please drop anchor and come to my birthday party,
right,
continued through my life.
Me too.
Right.
Me too. I understand. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I totally understand that. So, did you feel like, or do you recall feeling like you were leaving what you loved at home, or were you scared or apprehensive about where you were going? Like, how can you recall how you felt?
I was ready for a big adventure.
Right.
We got to London. We got to London and we stayed. I don't remember what it was. It was some kind of place that was affiliated with the mission, I guess, in some sort. And that was when I found out that children don't eat with adults in England. Okay.
You go to the kiddie table.
Yes, my introduction to British cuisine was Marmite on bread.
That's like Vegemite kind of sort.
Very much
yeah,
so.
Very
yeah.
much so. Right. Okay.
Right?
I spent a little time in Perth.
Okay.
In my Navy days.
So you know these things, right?
That shit is nasty, for the record.
and when we went to bed that night, the heater in the room, you had to put shillings in it to get a certain amount of time of heat. And I just remember how cold it was, and I thought, boy, this sucks. It's not what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
But then we flew on to Nairobi, and the journey continues, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Was it culture shock for you upon arrival? Like, wow, like this is.
It was, because I mean, we one day we're in England and it's like 30 degrees or something, and the next day we're 5,000 feet above sea level on the equator.
Ooh, now what's the at 5,000 feet? I'll just pause for a second. You check the focus on everything. We're all good. Okay, just double checking. We had one episode we did where I was a little out of focus. So at 5,000 feet, but at the equatorial at 5,000 feet, is it still hot?
It was hot, but it wasn't humid. And
Right.
and rather than having, so the seasons are different because it's the year is more or less divided into rainy seasons and dry seasons as opposed to spring, summer, fall,
Right,
and
right.
winter.
Right. What's the flora and fauna like? A lot of what different monkeys? You know what I mean, like that type of thing more, and birds. I'm sure a ton of birds.
A ton of birds.
Right.
Well, so the flora. Wait a minute. That's the flowers, right?
Yeah. Right. Plants and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like jungle.
I'm trying to remember. This is like basic science, like
Right, right.
70 years ago or whatever that I learned.
Right.
Maybe not quite that long, but where like Nairobi is is on the plains, but the
Right.
high plains, and it's in the Great Rift Valley.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so it was largely grasslands.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Tsavo National Park there is one of the big parks in the game preserves in the
Right.
in the country. But as we went into further from Nairobi, the mission boarding school that I ended up going to was on the side of the Great Rift Valley.
Right.
And so we were looking down into it and out over the extinct volcano. It's funny, dancing on a volcano. Mount Longonot was directly across part of the Great Rift Valley from our school. And there were stories I could tell you about that too, sneaking away from school to jump the trains that rode that went out there and going up and around the perimeter of Mount Longonot and trying to get back on the trains and then back to the station where we would jump off as we, not the station, the mission station, right?
Right.
Where we'd jump off as the train slowed down to make the grade going up and trying to get back before anybody realized we were gone. Not easy to do.
Right.
But my first experience so flora and fauna, where are we going with this? Flora and fauna. There was, it depending on where you were, okay,
Right.
there was jungle.
Right.
Okay?
That's what I figured. That was
Right.
kind of where the question was.
Yeah.
I was kind of like
But-
trying to envision what it looked like. You know what I mean? Were you in the jungle primarily, like where you were at?
No.
No.
But largely, a lot of where we were was in grasslands and
Right.
farms and that kind of
So
thing.
that's more like almost 5,000 feet. So it's almost like a high plain.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But then there was also there was times when we were into further up. Eventually, we ended up at a station called Naramoro, which was another 1,000 feet higher and was basically just off of Mount Kenya.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and so the forest growth was heavier there, and as we went up the mountain, and I've had the privilege of being to the top of both Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro,
Right.
the two highest points in Africa. But it changed. So
Right.
the scenery was never the same. And when we would go from Nairobi to Mombasa, of course, we were ending up at sea level,
Right.
or next to,
Right.
right? And there it was hotter and more humid.
Sure. So what are your memories of, so you figure you arrive at 6. So you don't, I know at 6, my ability to be able to understand what I was seeing was rudimentary at best. You know what I mean? Like I could kind of tell, but no. I mean, what are your memories? Do you feel like your first impressions were that you were well embraced?
Well, my first impressions of the school I was going to, see, I started first grade here,
Right.
and was 3 months into first grade.
Right.
I saw the school, the Rift Valley Academy, where I was going to be a student for the next 12 years. And it was more than a cultural shock. It was
Right.
Mau Mau uprising or rebellion had just finished. And so the school was still surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers.
Mm.
And I went, what the? Well, I don't think I knew the word fuck at that point in my life. Okay? But I'm going, what is this?
Right. Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I found out that I was too young to keep going in first grade there. And so I had to start first grade again the following September.
Did you feel like you got left back, like, resentful, like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not...
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's no way I was ready to go away, 9 months out of the year to a boarding school at that point. And probably a year later, I was very little more prepared for it.
Right.
But that was what was, necessary.
You think the other kids kind of embraced you? Like, were they cool with you early on? Or were they like, who the heck is this kid? You know what I mean? Like, how were Americans viewed there at that time?
So the boarding school was almost 100% American children.
Really? Okay.
They were all missionaries' children.
Probably the reason for the barbed wire and the guard towers.
Well, it could,
right now that I think about it.
Could be,
right?
yeah.
You know what I mean?
And over time, of course, that changed, and some of the Kenyan citizens began to come to attend the school.
Okay.
As well.
Okay. Were you blended out so your parents are missionaries, right? So, but you're going to a school that's primarily missionary children.
Yes.
Right? So, at least in the beginning, there's not a huge amount of overlap of like forced blending. Like, you're not like going to school with Kenyan children right out of the gate. You know what I mean? Where it's like you're in the recess or whatever, and you're all trying to figure out how to navigate your way through. But out in town, right, was that missionary environment, did that continue there, or did you find yourself more blended with the Kenyan children and playing with Kenyan kids and those type of things? Or
well, as we changed, we ended up on different mission stations over the course of the 12 years that I was there.
Right.
One, Caldama Ravine and Cogway. I think there was another one, Narromoro. So at time changed and location changed, and I grew older. Of course, I started to spend more of my time with the children of the people, that we were who we were amongst.
Right.
So our boarding school was not a 9-month continuous. It was 3 months at school, a month at home, 3 months at school, a month at home, all year long. And this plays into another part of this, what we may get to, which was, my mother's health.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I'll try to stay on, somewhat.
We can bounce all around. It
somewhat
really
where where we are, right?
Right.
When we went to the second mission station, right, which was Cogway, there was nothing there. It was not a Quonset hut, but it was a metal hut.
Right.
That was about 20 by 12.
Right.
That my dad and several other people put up, and a small camper that fit in the back of an 8-foot pickup truck.
Okay.
And that's what my mom and dad and my sister and I lived in while my dad built the mission residence on that station. And one of the first days that he was there, a Kikuyu gentleman, I'll never forget him because he became a part of our life for all the years that I was there and many after as well. Onesimus Chow Kinyon Dewey was his name. And Onesimus, just like the president of the country, Jomo Kenyatta, later president of the country, right?
Right.
Onesimus had been rounded up and put into a detention center, which was a nice word for a concentration camp.
Right, right.
Okay. And yet when he showed up at the mission station and talked to my dad, he said, he said, what can I do to help? I'm here to help.
Mm-hmm.
My dad said, I don't need, I don't know. Like, I'm not looking to hire anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, okay, but I'm here to help. And over the next at least 20 years of their time there, none of us actually moved from Cogway to Narramoro later, as my parents changed stations, because he had become almost a part of our family.
Yeah,
right?
It sounds like that.
He became the translator because my dad had gone with a degree in, he had gone to Philadelphia College of the Bible,
Right.
okay, as had my mom, and was had the paper as a minister.
Right.
But when they got to Kenya,
Right.
right, the mission board there said to my dad, we've got a lot of people that can preach, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else can you do?
Right. Right.
And my dad said, well, I can build a little, because his father had built numerous homes in this country for himself and his family.
Right.
Right? And so for the next 30 years, my dad either physically built things for the missions, or in the later years, headed up the maintenance department at the same school that I had gone to, Rift Valley Academy at Kijabi.
Boy, I got to pause for a second on that, just because I feel like there's a parallel in that, just in terms of like how we carry ourselves in being of service today. We got a lot of people that can fucking preach, right? But what are we doing? Right? And certainly there's opportunity for people to share a message of hope, those type of things. But I think that some of the challenge in this world is people's unwillingness, right, to do more, right? And because I know of your background a bit, like that you're a builder by trade, and and we've talked about that, and that your school and your background in architecture and those type of things, right? Like I think that's right. But and engineering and those type of things. But probably what I didn't connect was that you had an example of that from your father. And what's really interesting is that in the United States, right? I think that builder ethos became less and less common as years went on, right? Like if you go like 1800s, right? Probably everybody was building their own shit, right? You know what I mean? And then, the Industrial Revolution comes along, and, people are building houses for others, right? You know what I mean? So your father comes along and he's built a couple houses, here in the States, and then he gets to a place where there's I'm guessing a more desperate need, especially after there's been some level of revolution. Typically that that not only displaces people but displaces finances. That changes many things.
So here's a funny statistic.
Right. Okay.
More people died. More Europeans died in Kenya during the years of the Mau Mau in traffic accidents than were victims or were killed, in that uprising. Because the brunt of the violence was done by the Kikuyu people against the Kikuyu people.
Okay.
Okay?
Because of a difference in political viewpoint?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
their
because I do know,
philosophy.
like, in some parts of Africa, there are differences. Those differences were, socioeconomic, racial. There have been, some uprisings in other parts of Africa where people exterminated other people because they were from different tribal beliefs or things like that. So in this case, you're basically talking about tribally similar people.
Yes. And Kenya has over 80 tribes in it.
Right.
Different languages, different tribes.
I saw Mombasa.
Yes.
From an aircraft carrier. I could see we passed by.
It's a shame that they didn't let you port there.
They were afraid to let us port at the time. They said that the AIDS rate was too high. They knew everybody was going to get off the ship, and the first thing that was going to happen was they were going to have some conjugal relations.
Oh.
And they didn't want a bunch of guys coming back to the States. And those, you're talking about the early 90s.
Sure.
AIDS was still, epidemic proportions in Africa, far more than it was even in the United States. So, so I think, because we were in Mogadishu, right? We pulled off the coast of Somalia, and they talked about porting in Mombasa. They even, I believe we were inoculated with some additional shots, while we were on our way to try and build immunity towards some of the things that we would be exposed to. I know it gave me, I had a malaria vaccine. And, man, it was a live vaccine. You know what I mean? So they gave me the shot, and for 3 days I laid in a little tiny rack, slick with sweat, and I think I was some nuts number, like 8 or 9 pounds. I came out 3 days later, and I had abs. I never had abs. I had abs. You know what I mean? It was like, you know what I mean? I was so sick, man. I was like, oh, this is the weakened version of malaria?
Yeah,
man.
I have to tell you, you should be glad that you were only sick from the vaccine,
right,
and that you never had a full-blown case of malaria. And malaria is actually something that stays in the system once you've had it. Okay, so that even today, although it's been many years since I had, malaria initially,
right,
when I am sick in certain ways, I can still get the chills and fever and the whole malaria attack again. But thank goodness, not the way that I had, because I wanted to die. First time I had malaria, I wanted to die.
There's a really interesting book. I'm not sure if you've ever read it. It's called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Okay, and Guns, Germs, and Steel talks about the disparity between continents and between people, and whereas many of us look at it as social differences or financial differences or those type of things, talks about the resources that are available on the continent, as that continent comes from the Stone Age into the modern age, and that different continents had different, basically, access to different resources, right? So, and for that reason, some continents were set statistically behind because they didn't have some of those resources, and some of those things were, metals. Some of those things were, foodstuffs, the ability to farm, and you start to see that some of these differentials between, wealth and power in different parts of the globe were really because some people were better set up, right? Because they had more of the materials.
Yes.
In the book, I believe it's in the early part of the conversation, the gentleman's a young man, and he's in Australia, and he's talking to an Aboriginal people, gentleman that he's talking to talks about cargo. How come you have so much more cargo than we have, right? And what he's really talking about is the trappings of, what this individual comes along with, you know what I mean? Like the machinery, or, like finance or whatever. And set him on this path of looking at all these differentials. And the reason why I brought this up is one thing that, and I believe this is where I picked this up out of this book. He said that, one of the reasons why there's a disparity still to this day with Africa versus some other parts of the globe is that the effect of malaria on the global population or in the population of the continent, and that it affects their GDP by, I believe it was like 1.5 or 2 percentage points. I'm spitballing in terms of the numbers, but that literally holds back the continent, right? Untreated malaria for so long set back Africa versus many other parts of the globe because of malaria. I had never really thought about that, but having the weakened strain, right? Because you're like malaria, schmalaria, whatever, and I'm like, oh no, that's hardcore. You know what I mean? So, did you find that? Okay, so one of the things that I'll say I'm blessed to have experienced in my life is to experience other cultures in other parts of the globe and see, for what it's worth. And this doesn't come from a position of, how do I say this? Not from a position of, oh, look at us, we're American, look how great we have it, right? But in experiencing other parts of the world and seeing how poor people are.
Yes.
Was it a shock?
Well, at 6, it wasn't a shock. But over the years, because my parents came back and forth when I was in 5th grade, they came back for a year of, taking the message of what they were doing in Kenya to the churches that were supporting them. There was no mission support.
Right.
Per se. It all came from individuals and from individual churches. So I was actually here for 5th grade, Glenside Elementary.
Now, would they come back for the sake of additional fundraising to bring resource back to?
Not so much to raise funds, but it was just to keep the awareness of what they were doing and of encourage people to continue supporting them because of the things they were able to do. And
is that type of structure, like, what do we call that, tithing? Like where people give away a percentage of their...
I guess.
Is that how that works?
It was basically a gift of love from the churches and from the individuals. And then I was back in 10th grade, Cheltenham High School, beat Abington, but for the same thing. Other than that, we were there. But my parents really believed, my dad especially, in the value of travel as an education. And so we went different ways. And so I've had the opportunity to be in France and to go by boat from Mombasa to Naples and get off at the Suez Canal and go through Egypt and see the pyramids and see the Cairo Museum and all of those cool things, and then
what was more of a shock? Was it more of a shock? Okay, so now, because you've talked about going back and forth, right? You know what I mean? Like, you get there at 6, right? But then you had several times where you came back to the States.
Yes.
Right? So did you find it difficult arriving back in the States? Or did you find it difficult going back to Africa if you've been in the States? In other words,
I think neither one, because from almost my first day actually in school at RVA, I started to develop the chameleon aspect that so many of us have, wanting to fit in, desperately wanting to fit in, having to fit in for my own sanity and to some extent physical security.
Right.
Because, wow. So I'll come back to this in a second. Just want to talk a little bit more about my mom and dad,
sure.
if I can, right? Because when I say Onesimus came and said to my dad, I'm here to help. Okay?
Right.
I've really minimized things because he ended up heading up, like when my dad had people they were quarrying stone, carrying it up from the quarry by the river, one stone at a time on people's backs, sitting down and...
You mean to help your father build?
To help my father build, right?
Wow.
And Onesimus just took charge of all of that, right? And the stone would come up rough, and then the masons would cut it to square the stones to lay up to build the
and
first.
he built more
home.
than the home.
Oh, yeah.
They built.
My dad
church.
built homes. He built churches. He built school buildings. He built a hydroelectric plant at Cogway, and then other small like diesel powered electric.
Did he have more of an engineering background than just knowledge of building?
No,
but
but
because when you go from okay, he built a house, get it.
Right.
Okay, he built a church, get it. I built a fucking hydroelectric dam. You go, wow, okay.
But he had a little help there,
okay.
because the first people that when we went to Kijabi the first time,
right.
My cultural shock, we stayed with Dr. Jim Probst and Dr.
Why do I know that name, Probst?
I don't know. I don't know, Jimmy, but he was a Renaissance man.
Okay.
Okay, and he was not a medical doctor.
Right.
Although people thought he was a medical doctor, so in the conversion process, many of the people wanted to have the stretched earlobes that they had
Okay.
removed, cut, and sewn back into place. So he was Dr. Probst for that aspect, but he was really, his background was in engineering and in building. And so he was the one who, really kind of pushed my dad and the whole, it's like, hey, we have a waterfall, below the mission station, and it's not that far to run the power all the way up to the station, kind of thing. And so Dr. Probst, Jim Probst, and my dad, along with Onesimus and others, right, built this hydroelectric plant, power generating plant. But Onesimus, in addition to those kind of things, also served as a translator for my parents. And when I say that my dad spent his life building, he also took every opportunity that he could to carry the message of God's love to the people around him.
Right.
And so my mom would load her pedal-powered organ into the back of the Land Rover, and my dad and Onesimus and she would go out and they would, have a church service, whether it was on a Sunday
and
or
would Onesimus translate the church service?
Would the translator. Now, my mom and dad actually learned both Kikuyu and Swahili.
Really? Okay.
But not to the extent where my dad was comfortable preaching in them.
Right. Did you, so you arrived at a young age.
Yes.
And typically you're a lot more malleable.
Yes.
Right? Did you end up learning the languages at some level?
At some level, yes. But
right.
not
enough
nearly,
to navigate your way through, or?
Well, let's say this. When I went back to Kenya after graduating, or after my second year at Drexel, it kind of, the time frame, right? I knew enough that I could still ask, how much are things?
Right.
Where can I buy weed? Listen, I learned.
Come on, Dave.
I learned that in a lot of different languages, right? Because, of course, I learned it in Spanish later on, right, and other things.
Sure.
I knew how to say stuff like, I want the strong shit.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
Where's the beer? Those kind of things that I thought were important. But that's not what I learned originally in those languages.
Yeah, at 6 years old, the first thing is, where do I get the weed?
Yeah, where do I get the weed? Yeah. So, but So my dad did carry the message, as did my mother.
Right.
Right? But my mother had medical issues.
Yeah, you had said that. What was...
Right? And so now I guess they call it bipolar. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it was manic depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so our school year was a cycle of 3 months at school, a month at home.
Off, right.
3
You
months at
said that.
school, a month at home.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom's manic depressive cycles were 3 months going up and back through the mean, and 3 months, and in those times she was up for anything, ready to do anything. And then 3 months below the mean, where at a certain point just getting out of bed was too much. Right? And so those cycles never coincided.
Right.
But we didn't learn this
Right.
until much later,
Right.
through
Right.
observation. And so we might make plans when everything was great, and
Right.
then when it was time for those things to happen,
Right.
we
She
might
was
be in
incapable.
the right. It was
Right.
she was
Yeah.
incapable,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time, the treatment for this kind of thing, okay, was going away for a stay,
Right.
right?
Right. Respite
Rest.
or...
Electroshock
right.
therapy.
Electroshock, yeah.
Okay.
Lobotomy. right,
Well,
there
thank
were-
goodness they never
yeah.
lobotomized my mother.
Mhm.
But at a certain point, a doctor suggested to her that it might be a chemical issue.
Mm.
And they prescribed lithium to her.
Hmm.
And
There's that
As-
song, that Sting song, Lithium Sunset. And that's what he's talking about.
so as that was fine-tuned in her life, it began to take out the peaks and the valleys,
Okay.
and to allow her to function much more on a like a sine wave of of smaller
Right.
magnitude than
Right.
what she had been living.
Did it give her the ability to function more at...
Absolutely, in every aspect of her life. But those were difficult times.
What do you figure about the time when they started to integrate that into her life? Because you figure your life, right? We're tied to the relation with our parents probably
Absolutely.
more than anything else, right?
Absolutely.
So, you about what age was it that they started to apply that level of treatment to her?
Probably I was in my early teens,
Okay.
maybe later. And Jimmy, I love my parents so much.
Right.
All right. But there were things that happened that created vast distance.
Right.
Okay? And one of them was my dad's frustration and inability to fix, manage, and control my
Especially your
mom's
mom.
situation and how it affected all of our well-being. Right? And I remember...
Did you think he just kind of... There was this phase before she received levels of treatment, medication or whatever, where he was just like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Jimmy, I remember I don't know if I've ever shared this with anyone, but I remember my dad yelling at my mother because she couldn't get out of bed, right? And of course there were mission people telling her, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be like this. And that here she was, they had committed their lives to being in Africa to carry the message.
Right.
And people are telling her she just needed more faith. But I remember my dad, just in frustration, yelling at my mother. And I remember grabbing my BB gun and running into the room and pointing it at my dad and screaming at him to stop. And my dad just came across the room and knocked it. I took it out of my hands.
Yeah, right.
Right?
It's a BB gun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a BB gun.
Yeah. But the
man,
intent was all the same.
But the intent was the same. I wanted to protect my mother.
Right.
And he wanted to help my mother.
Right.
We were all just so
Ill-equipped.
ill-equipped to
Right.
do that.
Right.
You know, and thank God that at a time and place of his choosing, he made help available
Right.
to
Right.
her and eventually to all of us.
Right.
But those are some of the things that shaped my childhood.
Right.
And then
Do you think that during that phase, right? So do you think that during that phase in your life was the first level of dis-ease or discomfort with what was going on around you, where you started to look for some level of escape, whether it was fantasy or drugs or whatever?
it was always fantasy.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
before-
I was a good student. Okay, and having said that, I hope nobody takes away the feeling that my dad or my mother were people that didn't love us and didn't do the best that they could for us.
I didn't get that sensation.
Right? Because there was little that I enjoyed as much as, for instance, being able to walk down to the stream in front of our house with my dad and for us to go trout fishing together.
Right.
Okay. Or for me to be allowed to use his tools. Right.
Right.
Which I fucked up, of course, because they weren't my tools.
Right.
And I
You
didn't
respect them.
No, right, exactly.
Sure.
Right. And when you take a chisel to a nail instead of a nail puller or what have you, it makes life difficult to use it as a chisel again, right? But how did we get off on this? So my dad, okay, today is one of my heroes, right? But when I was 18. And I remember my dad saying to me as we were driving into Nairobi, it was like a 100-mile journey.
Right.
We had time to talk. And I'm like 18, and I think I know everything. Maybe 16.
Don't we all?
Right? I thought I knew everything. And my dad opened up to, you have no idea how difficult it is. It must have been earlier than that, with your mother's sickness, right? Her disease, and with the temptations of the available women in Nairobi.
Do you think he partook in those
Never.
temptations? Okay.
Never. Okay.
But it
But
wasn't
just
easy.
his telling me
Yes.
that,
Yes.
I went like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa.
Hey,
right?
guess what? Dad's a man too.
Dad's a man too. But so that was one thing. There was another time when we had a discussion about interracial marriage. Or actually, it was more dating at that stage of the game, right?
Right.
And
Well, I would have thought that based on your situation, your circumstance, your exposure to others, that it would seem kind of, was it considered okay
well,
in Kenya? Like,
by some and not
Right.
by others.
right.
Okay.
Now,
And at the time, my dad was not one of the ones who thought that it was okay.
okay.
All right. And so being just a little judgmental,
Right.
right,
Right.
I kind of leaned into, I love you, Dad, but I will never respect you
Right.
because of some of the things that you do and say.
So here's an interesting question. So, or at least interesting to me, is that, having, like my first real true experiences with racism, right, where I became more aware of the existence of racism were in parts of the world where I was a minority. Right? You know what I mean? Like I was kind of oblivious to the, the trials and tribulations associated with racism in the United States in the years that I grew up. You know what I mean? Like, I say oblivious, I was given the luxury of oblivion, right? I didn't really see, the differential between color and how that affected socioeconomic conditions and a bunch of other, was completely oblivious to that. And then I went halfway around the world and was like, and realized that people were looking at me with racist eyes because I was the foreign person, and would you say that in Kenya, right, interracial relations were viewed negatively by Kenyan people? Like, look at this white guy going out with my daughter, or was that also the case, at least in part, or you know what I mean? Like, what was your impression of it?
I don't know, Jimmy, because
did you date any Kenyan women while you were there at 18 or whatever? Because you went back.
I didn't date anybody, Jimmy. I had a cloistered life, man. And we'll get to that too eventually, I think. But coming back to my dad for a minute, okay, the redemption that time and recovery allow us.
Right.
All right. I wanted to be anything but like my dad when I was 18 and I went away to college at Drexel.
Right.
By the time I got clean, I understood. I began to understand, okay, and to relate to the person that my dad really was. Not the person that I had built him up in my mind as.
The human.
But the human who he really was.
Right.
Okay. And if I could be, and my dad's been gone now since 94, right? But I said to him, because he was dying from cancer, and they were living in Florida, and I went down to see him. And I said to him, Dad, I just want to tell you how sorry I am.
Right.
For when I told you that I would love you, always love you, but never respect you. And at the time he said, I would rather you respected me than you loved me. I didn't understand that at all. But when I talked to him all these years later and in recovery, as he was in the latter part of his life, the last year of his life, I said, I just want to tell you how sorry I am for the hurt that I must have imparted to you at that time. And my dad said to me, he said, not only did I forgive you, but I forgot.
How about that?
And that was like the most powerful thing.
Well, I mean, at 18, we wield words as weapons.
Yes, we do.
And at 18, we've learned less about the world than our family has forgotten.
Yes,
right?
we have.
So, I recently read or somehow that there's a biological process for children as they become young adults. And kind of taken aback by that whole thought process because I thought it was only me. But to just come that there is a very common pattern for children as they enter into their teenage years where they almost biologically have to see their parents as inferior or enemies, or because it's a biological process built into our launch. Because if you stayed, you use the term cloister, right? If you stayed isolated with family, right, you would never be forced to go away.
Right.
And if you didn't, you would. Somebody said that it was, biologically, it was so that you would go to another village, right? And it tended to keep our DNA diversified because, you know what I mean, we didn't overlap.
Sure.
So I could kind of see that, but I also think to myself, like at 18, I thought my dad was an idiot. And at 24, I was like, man, this motherfucker knows some shit. Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's amazing how, you know, and, you know, my father was a badass. You know what I mean? Like, he was a fire chief and he was a biotech that worked in a lab for Merck. He did many, many things. You know what I mean? He was of service his whole life. But it's funny that at 18, for whatever reason, you know what I mean? Like, you know, he was an idiot. And then, so, I think what really happens is the natural process of humility of getting your ass kicked. Because between 18 and 24, or mid-20s, you realize how hard life really is. And it disconnects you from the fantasy of what other people's are supposed to be. And you go from looking at your family as an icon, right, as an avatar, and instead looking at them as a human. And there's a huge transition there, because when you see the humanity of somebody, right, you know what I mean, it disconnects yourself from, you know, the high expectations and the low acceptance. Right. And I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like, me too. Like, if I had an opportunity, even now, I had an opportunity to spend time with my father. My father died at 60 in 2007. So, you know, type 1 diabetes. So, you know, complications associated with that, you know, and he never got to see me, you know, on the journey of being clean. You know, part of the sanity that I gained today is, you know, that in conversations like this, Jim Sr.'s listening in. You know what I mean? Like, he gets to hear this because even though I got the ability to make some things right, you know, there were some things that were left unsaid, and you know, and power greater than me didn't see fit to allow that opportunity directly, but rather in how I live my life today. Right? You know what I mean? Like, and I wrote this article yesterday that I sent into to Forbes. And what I said in that article was that I often say I'm channeling Jim Sr., right? And what I, you know, and you know, like we talked about when we talked about this show before, you know, when I was talking to you about being on the show, and I said this is a legacy play, right? You know, for my own sanity and the way I live my life today, I believe that the legacy that we leave isn't the memory that we carry of others, but the influence of that memory, that leadership influence that goes on to influence us in ways, and we take the positive of what other people do, right? And we carry that on, and that's the legacy, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, your father's, you know, kindness and commitment to helping others, right, and ministering, and you know, and being part of that community and building, right, you know, and doing those things, right, you know, and I see how you carry yourself and what you do for your family and for others and for carrying the message and for doing these things. Your father's legacy lives on in you.
And I'm so grateful for that, Jimmy. If I ever perceive myself as being a close approximation of my dad,
yeah,
I will be so happy. You know, I mean,
Me
that
too.
is who
Me too.
I would like to be.
Yeah, me
half the man that my father was.
Me too.
I just didn't know it for so long.
No, me either.
And
isn't that crazy that, you know, that, and, you know, and with age and with time, that's the funny thing about wisdom. Like, what's that saying? Like, hindsight's 20/20, but it's not nearly as valuable as foresight.
Right.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, it would have been great if I would have had the foresight to see how incredibly wise and giving and powerful and, the man that he really was while he was fucking alive. I'm only 5 years from, when my dad passed. I'm coming close into the age when he left us. And now I'm like, holy shit. Right? You know what I mean? Like, if I'm a flea on the ass of what he did, you know what I mean? Like, the lives he saved, you know what I mean? Like, he'd kick in the door of a burning building and grab you by the fucking scruff of your neck and drag you the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like, badass.
I think you've done something similar in your journey, too. Not a building, but...
No, but, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? I drag people out of the, I stand shoulder to shoulder with people while their lives are on fire, right? And, strangely enough, for not being a person of being a person of faith, but not a person of religion, for the first time in my life, because of this conversation, I'm onboarding, the word minister, right? Because I've always seen the word minister with a religious connotation, but really realized in recovery in many ways, showing love and support of others, even if it's not delineated with any religious undertone, is a type of ministering, right? You know what I mean? Like, and that isn't necessarily speaking wisdom, right? Because sometimes I'm the last motherfucker you want to listen to when it comes to being wise. But some of the best wisdom we give is the love we give to others, right? And I can stand with you shoulder to shoulder in the storm. Like, my tendency to need to fix, manage, and control your shit, right? To spray water on your fucking fire. I can't do that for you. And frankly, I'd rob you from the fucking journey of learning how to spray water on your own fire. But if I could just stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the storm, maybe not... Right, I can come to we talked about this before this. You know what I mean? Like that being an empath, right? When we go to the volcano, I go with you, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm emotionally connected to your pain, so I have to be cognizant of that. Like, I have to think a little bit about. I have to be connected, but I've also had to learn how to disconnect. You know what I mean? To allow people the privilege of being on their journey and to not run in with my fix, manage, and control tool set and try and rob you from those gifts of desperation that lead you to change. And every time I've ever tried to come in with my fix, manage, and control tool set, I really, I ultimately didn't fix anything anyway. I robbed people of the gift of desperation that would have more likely led to the change. Come in there with my fucking magic Jimmy wand and shit. You know what I mean? Throw a little money on it, or you know what I mean? Think, And the reality of it is that, as time's going on, I've watched, my predecessors, guys like you, and I watch, that to just lead with love. And to back out of, I'm a solutions-oriented cat. So, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay, let's get in the fucking solution. But I want to get in your fucking solution. Right? You know what I mean? I'm like, don't you just see that if A, B, C, and D, right? You know what I mean? Like, I watch it with my, my middle child, right? She's, in her deeply in her first career, and called me just a day or two ago, emotionally distraught over work. You know what I mean? It's heavy. You know what I mean? She's in a high pressure situation. It's her first quote unquote real job, and she's feeling completely overwhelmed. And my first inclination as dad is, like my trigger thought, I didn't act on it. My trigger thought is, put my cape on, fly into the rescue, you know what I mean? And then I'm like, I pull myself back, like, don't offer that. Not because I can't. I'm in a position more than I ever have before to actually, I got the S and the cape, you know what I mean? I can come in and wave the wand. But what I would really ultimately do is rob her of the life lessons associated with the strife, right? Nothing builds character and decision-making prowess more than
Yes.
getting close to the heat, right? You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, don't get close to that. Look, come on back here. You know what I mean? And sometimes you just got to let people, you hope that they don't fall in.
And it happens.
And it does. But I think myself sometimes too wise and too fucking powerful. And one of the greatest wisdoms that I'm gaining now in my mid-50s is slow your roll, Jimmy Dinardo. Right? You know what I mean? Like, the same power that's got me has got them. And I'm not in control over outcomes. Right? You know what I mean? To stay in my own lane, to lead with love, and certainly not to hold back when I can offer help.
Right.
That feels good. You know what I mean? To be able to, a little financial leverage or a little this or that. But I can very quickly, step in and fly in and be like, let me. And what I really end up doing is it's okay. So we talk about. I'm going to digress for a second. We'll talk about this from a business perspective, right? So, because I would really like to, Dean. I'm watching him learning the aspects of this business, right? And and gaining tools, right? And some of it's by interfacing with me and learning some of the trials and tribulations that I've been through. And I've kind of put him in some situations that were probably a little bit more uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Where I was like, oh shit, am I really gonna put him in this situation where he's going to interface with these people and do this? And then there's another part of me that's like, well, fuck, I had nothing. I could put on a suit and went out and kicked in doors developing business when I had, I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, and I was scared. And child support court was after me, and you know what I mean. I had failure to file taxes for 5 years, and I was going in the mailbox like it had teeth, scared to death of the mail. You know what I mean? I had laid the groundwork for what could potentially be my own oblivion, but the reality of it is that digging myself out of that and making it right with the IRS and, you know what I mean, and and recovery and all these other things, they gave me tools that I wouldn't have had without it, right? So, I'm really interested in, the legacy that your father left, and but what I'm here to say is that I see it in you. I watch how you carry yourself today.
Thank you.
And I'm not just going to, and my best friend said, one day, I'm not going to say I'm proud of you because that would sound almost condescending, in fact, you know what I mean? But, and I kind of took that on board, you know what I mean? I'm impressed. And when I'm impressed by others, my first trigger is to attempt to emulate. Right. I said things last night when you and I were together, that were things that have been imparted in me by others. Frankly, sometimes don't even necessarily know whether they're 100% accurate or not. They're just an after effect of the emulation. Right. You know what I mean? Rich B, who I told you was in here at one point, from a humility perspective, I remember when he celebrated, what was that? I think at the time he celebrated 40 years. And I was like, and we were setting up for the meeting. And he was like, yeah, I'm bringing in somebody else to speak for me. And I was like, what? He says, yeah, I want to get somebody in the chair who has 3 years. And I was like, whew, hair stand up with my arms. I was like, what? Fuck out of here. You know what I mean? I'm like, to me, it was like, how is this not your show? Right? You know what I mean? But, and I think in the end, we coached him into still getting in the chair. I know I heard him celebrate for 45 and it was incredible, but it was just like, wow, it's not all about me. Right? You know what I mean? And stepping out of the way, and that was part of what that article said. You know what I mean? The article was about, what storytelling can do in business and in life. And part of what I said was, and this came from something that was told to me in business, but I think it applies here too, is that the quickest way to success is to tell the stories of the people that are successful because I'm not yet. And then to tell my story. And then tell the story of the people that I've influenced in their success. Right? And the quicker I can get to tell the story of my people and out of my own story, the more successful I become. And this play, Dancing on a Volcano, is a great opportunity for me to get out of my own way of telling my fucking story, because I haven't even scratched the surface yet, right? Truthfully. And to be able to really, in the interest of learning and gaining strength, get an opportunity to put people like you in the chair, right? And get your background and your history, right? And the takeaway from that, the really powerful piece, and the play here is that from this conversation, right, the legacy play is your children, your grandchildren, the people that are not old enough to really understand, right, the fire. Because the truth is, when you get to the fire, you think you're the only person that's ever been in the fucking fire. You know how great it would have been to have your dad and my dad do this? How powerful it would have been to be able to have somebody who's been to the edge of the fire and experienced what they experienced when they left, right? A good portion of the depth of their stories went with them, right? We live in a different time today. And the different time that we live in today, it gives us the ability to capture. Right? And that's why long form. Because people are like, man, this is 2 hours long. This is a lot of fucking time. I'm like, yeah, right. It is a lot of time. Right? And we're still just getting a snapshot, a snippet of. But that snippet is way more powerful than the 5-minute sound bites we get.
Sure.
Right? And that legacy lives on. So when your grandson, right? When we're long since gone, when his children are old enough and they're like, hey, what was Jim Jr. like? Right? Maybe they get a little bit more of a snapshot of what the reality was rather than my imagination of, right? Because that's what we talked about. Like your dad and my dad, right? Like, they don't know shit because the avatar of who we see them as, right? And they're not living up to that. We never really get to a state of really seeing them for who they actually are in a deeper level of authenticity. Right. And we get that now here. We get to do that. When did you start using?
So,
come on, man. It's hot up there. Let's go. I'm coming.
all right. So,
first of all, you've been clean how many years now?
31.
31 years. Thank you. That's the hope. That's the hope.
My part in it was just staying one day at a time.
Right.
Just staying through everything.
Right.
That's happened during that time. Some days easier than others, but not quitting. Right. And I'm so grateful for that. But when did I first use? So I was at Drexel, right?
Okay.
It was my first year, 1969. And when I came from Kenya,
right.
Okay, I talked about my sheltered life there, right? I was looking, and it was the summer of 69, right? Mm-hmm. I was looking for sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Fucking right.
Right?
Of course.
The rock and roll came first.
Right.
The drugs came next. And then, and I got plenty of both of those. Mm-hmm. And then there was the sex, which, but first time I used, it was at the Spectrum, right before Christmas, 1969. Steppenwolf was performing. So anyway, right. Someone handed me a joint, and I did it. I don't even know that I really got, high.
But you broke precedent.
But it was the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? And
Would it have been unthinkable before then?
No, absolutely not. Wouldn't have been unthinkable. It was just the opportunity, right?
Yeah, right.
So,
did you feel like, like if my dad would see, like, was it an exercise in rebellion too? At least
I don't think
part?
there was any of that. I just wanted to get it on.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Okay. Cool.
And of course they played "Born to Be Wild," and I went, "Yeah, this is the start.
There you go.
This is the start, right?" But
okay.
what I should have listened to was when they played "Goddamn the Pusher Man."
Wow. Okay.
But I missed that part of the conversation. Okay. And from that time on, because I had like tobacco and a little alcohol.
Right.
Right. But that was the first time with drugs.
Right.
And within 3 months, see, a lot of people that I hear talk about a slow progression.
Right.
Right. Within 3 months, I had tried any and everything that was available, either legally or illegally, at the time. Okay?
Right.
I had tried it, and I had reached a point where I was using every day. Something. It didn't matter what.
And you're a freshman at Drexel, right?
A freshman at Drexel.
You want to hear something crazy? I'm a freshman at University of the Arts, Broad and Pine, right? I had tried weed a couple times, and I drank a few times or whatever. But, so, art college is different than many other colleges. And the main difference is, first of all, there was no frats. There was no sports teams. Our sport was getting high, right? I didn't know that when I got there, right? I didn't know how art college did it, right? And I went from, within just a few months, you know what I mean? Like dropping monster loads of acid. Like on Broad Street at 2:00 in the morning, right? With a 35 millimeter camera around my neck, taking pictures of pregnant hookers and talking to their pimps, right? Tripping balls, right? Like, I'm lucky I'm not dead. What are you doing, man? Fuck that. I'm like, taking pictures, right? You know what I mean? The worst thing in the world you want to do. Evidence at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, on Broad Street. How quickly to using every day. Building bongs for bong competitions with my buddies. Like, literally, like going to art classes and disappearing into the metal shop or into the plastic shop. And, so every week we could submit something for smoking, right? Some Mr. Potato Head that somebody made in ceramics, or and I'm building 6 foot high, because I want to impress everybody, and I'm a guy of escalation, and and I had built something with a motor and hoses and all this other shit because I wanted to be the man. And how quickly it went from something that was just because I was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable with me, still to this day. The dis-ease is a discomfort with me in my own skin without a deeper level of awareness and a step process. I'm a dead man, right? Because I feel inadequate, or I feel, and here I was in a place where I was socially, somewhere between, certainly has a certain level of social ineptitude, right? And here I was immersed with all these other kids. And, first chameleon.
Yes.
First real chameleon was, hey, wait, I fit in with these people as long as we're always getting on.
Yeah, and I don't know, Jimmy, if I ever fit in, but...
I didn't either. I tried. I tried to look that way.
I realized pretty early on, well, within that 3-month period somewhere,
right.
Okay, there was no way I could afford what I was doing. And someone said, well, why don't you sell stuff? Okay. And the next thing I knew, instead of buying like a little bit of something,
right,
like we were buying like a lot of stuff. And then I'm selling it to people in the dorm. Everybody had their sales set up.
Right.
What was funny was we didn't realize it was a whole circuitous thing. So that by the time I had got stuff, sold it to somebody else, they sold it to somebody else, they sold it to somebody else, they were expecting me to be buying it for personal consumption.
Right.
You know what I mean? Anyway, that was the beginning of dealing,
Right.
right?
I'm a horrible drug dealer, by the way.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I get high on my own supply, so
Right.
I'm always upside down when it comes to rehab.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So, but this led to, other things, right? And then it wasn't selling bales of pot, not bales, but keys of pot or whatever, right? But it was selling, red and green tabs, right? And or microdots.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was selling 10,000 714 bottles
Right.
of Quaaludes, right?
Right. Right.
And things like that. I wasn't even doing those at that point because my first experience, like with Quaaludes, was we were at a party. This was, I guess, it was years later. I was selling things way before I was using, like the Quaaludes, right? But we're at a party. I'm drinking Jack Daniels, and someone gave me Quaalude, right? I'm drinking more Jack Daniels. I'm going like, this ain't doing shit. Then he gave me two more.
Until it hit.
Right? And then I came to, and I was lying in the back of our van in the driveway of our house, right, the next morning, and going, what the fuck am I?
Yeah,
right? And then finding out, like, not only had I embarrassed my wife, and not only did I not remember, but I had almost fallen off of a second-story deck and broken the railings in the process, and then fell through a plate glass window of my friend's house, right? No recollection of any of it. And it was the beginning of people telling me, as I said, hey, dude, I'm really sorry, I just don't remember. And they're going, yeah, that doesn't really cut it. And it's like, we won't be having you here anymore. Started early. Things that should have been an indication to me that my life was going awry.
You remember halcyons? They call them forget-me-nots. A friend, I was in South Philly. I was like 19, right? Damien, rest in peace, brother. Damien says, we got you in these forget-me-nots. He said, I'm going to give this to you. He said, I want you to eat this. I want you to go to the bar. He says, but don't drink. Don't drink anything. And I ate the halcyon, and I went to the bar. And as soon as I walked in, hey, Jimmy, put them up. Next thing you know, I got all these shots lined up on the bar. I come back. I fall through the plate glass. I had a plate glass coffee table. I still have the scar on my thumb where I went through. I fell through the plate glass coffee table, hands first, and blah, blasted through it, and it sliced my thumb wide open. And the next day I woke up on my leather couch. I bled all over the couch, and my hand, I'm naked, and my hand is glued to my leg in blood, and I can't peel it off without splitting the wound wide open. So I get up naked, and it's all glued to my leg, and I hop in the shower, and I had to let hot water run on my my hand for like 5 minutes just so I could get it off my leg. My buddy said, what happened to you, man? I come out into he must have came to visit me at the night. I come out on my stairwell. There's shrimp and rice all over the stairwell. I must have fell and threw shit all over. Right? Man. But you, 100%, like you would think that those instances and those situations early on, that early unmanageability, would be like a sign to tell you, like, whoa.
Right.
Not me.
Yeah. Not me either.
Not me. You know what I mean? Like, strangely enough, I was like, like that was like, wait a minute. Like, you could have bled to death. Like, if I would have felt her and hit my wrist instead of my hand, I wouldn't be here.
Right. So, anyway, after 2 years at Drexel, I was just above the Mendoza line with my GPA. All right.
Now, what's the Mendoza line? Say more.
for a hitter in baseball, it's 200.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So I guess as a GPA, it was like 2.0.
Right.
And I had like maybe a 2.05, or possibly I was as high as
Just barely making it.
at 2.1,
You're
right? And I had applied to architecture at Drexel, right? But they didn't tell me that it was a night program. So I get here from Kenya, right? I'm all signed up. I've got the dorm I'm signed up for classes and everything. And they go, oh, no, we don't have architecture during the day. What am I supposed to do, right? They said, well, take civil engineering. It's basically the same thing. So I took 2 years of civil engineering and, basically a year of civil engineering and then a year of like drug dealing and shit, right? and I dropped out of school and I re-enrolled in the night program.
Okay.
And I went 8 more years at night.
Right.
Okay, to get a degree in architecture. In the meantime, when I came back, I'd gone back to Kenya after my first year. I came back to Drexel, and I didn't see any of my friends anywhere. But I went into the Drexel newspaper, the Triangle's office, right? And I saw Elaine, who eventually, I've married, right? And I went like, I don't know anybody.
Where is everybody?
Where's everybody? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I sort of got adopted by she and her friends because she had a bunch of friends in the newspaper office and stuff. The next thing I know, we're playing pinochle and we're, doing this and doing that, and of course, smoking outside of the.
I have not played pinochle in a long time.
Drexel.
I love playing pinochle, by the way. You know what I mean? Like, I love playing some pinochle, man. So.
Outside, we're outside of the activities, the DAC, the Drexel Activity Center. It's getting high, like in the corners and shit like that, and whatever. One thing led to another. She, somebody asked her if to marry him, right? And she told me, and I went, oh. I said, I was afraid to ask you. I wanted to ask you, but I was afraid to. I said, what did you tell them? And she said, I didn't tell them anything yet. Well, that was since 1970.
You were still in school.
70. We were both still in school. But in June of 1972, we got married. Okay, we moved to Harvard.
So she didn't marry the other guy.
She didn't marry the other guy.
Good for you.
Well, it was good for me.
Yeah. Good for you.
And it's still good. We've been married over 52 years at this point, right? But
what happened to that guy? Who cares? Sorry.
Well, actually, he passed away.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy. There's so many people I know that passed away. Not from various things, medical things, from accidents.
The older you get, the more common.
From all different things.
The ranks thin.
Way too many from the lifestyle and the drugs too. But so anyway, we're renting a house. We moved to Upper Darby from Havertown. We're renting an apartment. We moved from there to Upper Darby. We're backed up to on Lansdowne Avenue. There's the Jewish cemetery, Har Yehuda, right?
Yeah.
We're in
I used to live on Windermere.
Okay.
So I was like literally, I could walk a quarter of a block and walk into the.
So we lived on Harwood, which backed up. So
Right.
as I'm looking out my kitchen windows, right, there's the cemetery behind.
Yeah.
So we lived there a couple of years. My oldest son is born, and we go like, we've got to move. So my brother-in-law was a real estate agent, right? He said, let me show you a place in Yaden.
Okay.
Right? And we went and we looked at it, $27,000. Right? It's 1976. Yeah, 76. And I went, okay. And he goes, well, do you want to look around? No. Do you want to see any other places? No. I was like, okay, here we are. So we ended up there for the next 40-something years until like 5 years ago. so at this point, right, I'm married. We have our first of 5 eventually children, right? We have a house. I'm going to school at night, right? I started my own construction business because what else was I going to do, right? Doing a little of this, a little of that, and think. Well, it wasn't quite the first job I ever had. I mean, I worked at Lum's on City Line Avenue, which is long gone, but was right across from St. Joe's.
What was Lum's?
It was a restaurant.
Okay.
Right, and of course, part of the allure was the fact that they served alcohol.
Right.
All right, and so I could take like gallon jugs and fill them from the taps, and put them in my car and drive them back to my little shitty little apartment on Chestnut Street, 3443, I think it was. Anyway, it was in the 3400 block. But so I did that for a while. Then I thought like I've got to get something better or whatever. I'm going to sell stuff. All right. So, I mean, what do you sell when you've never done anything like that? Okay. Hey, we have an opportunity to sell encyclopedias. Well, that lasted for like a very short time.
Right.
And I never sold any.
It's fucking hard.
Never sold any encyclopedias.
Door-to-door sales,
right?
especially business to consumer, is brutal.
Yeah. So then the next thing was like Kirby vacuum cleaners. Right. I'm lugging this big ass heavy vacuum cleaner around, right? Trying to sell them door to door. That was like a non-starter. Right. Then someone said, well, why don't you sell something where you don't actually have to carry things and go door to door? You could be a sales recruiter and sell people. Right. Not sell people, but sell their service. You know what I mean? Right. So I was there for a while because that kind of allowed me the flexibility to like go down. And the office was in the tower above the station at 16th. The railway station, 16th.
Penn Center?
Penn Center.
Suburban station.
We're up in there, suburban station, right? No, not suburban station. That's the third. Oh, yeah, the suburban.
Penn Center,
right.
Suburban station.
Suburban station.
30th Street is.
Yes, 30th Street. Anyway, so I'm working in there and using, at every opportunity. And my life is like, but I think like I'm doing great, right? And then I get an opportunity to, I make an opportunity, whatever. I applied for a construction job with a big commercial builder. And the next thing I know, I'm working in like Havertown, Broomall area. And the guy is allowing me to be a project manager. Okay. Right? And we're putting up like townhouse buildings and a multi-building, multi-million-dollar project at Marple Commons, right across from the shopping center, Lawrence Park Shopping Center.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right? Okay. Well, I've built those buildings.
Okay.
Right? But, of course, my using is getting more intense. Okay. But I had
now,
all
is your family,
things.
is your wife noticing, or is she one of us?
It depends how you define us.
Is she?
My wife. So I could. Wow. My wife.
Careful.
Used.
Sorry.
She used with me.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things that took me time in recovery to realize, because I always thought that I was the victim.
Right.
Of everything.
That sounds familiar.
Right. But given time and retrospect, right, I was the perp.
Yes.
Right? I was 100%. Taking hostages. Right. I was destroying lives of people all around me. Right. Right. And the deeper it got, the worse it got. Right. So at a certain point, and I used to say, like, I lost everything. Poor me. I lost everything to my addiction. Right. I didn't lose a damn thing.
You gave things away.
I gave them all away. Right. And so when it came time to choose between getting out of the construction trailer to do my job, or sitting in there and drinking and doing other substances, I opted on the trailer.
Mm.
And when it came to, listen, you're not doing what you need to do, I was like, well, fuck it. I've got my own little company. I can make my way, right? And so I walked away from that.
Mm.
And along the way and over time, all of the things that I had started to accumulate, I began to give away.
Right.
Okay.
Mm.
And I gave.
Mm.
So anyway, so I have my own business. My brother-in-law used to live right down here. Elaine's brother, down here in New London, right? He was at the medical center there. He was a doctor.
Right.
Okay, so I started building some things for him. A greenhouse on the front of his house, and then like a subterranean almost greenhouse on the back of his house, and which was just an oxymoron, subterranean greenhouse, but it was greenhouse at the top, but the whole thing was below the
Right.
grade and opened into his living room, right? And pool house and all, and at a certain point I went to him and I went, listen, I'm a little short. Like, I know you always have stuff you need done.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me out? I've got some time. I had nothing but time, but
Right.
you know what I mean?
Right.
But I've got some time. And he said, look, he said, I don't hire drunks or addicts.
Ouch.
And I went, fuck you,
Mm-hmm.
right? In my mind. He said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I will put both of you, I will pay out of pocket for the both of you to go away for a 30-day rehab. See, I can't say I was never given opportunities to shortcut my journey,
Right.
right? And I went, I don't need rehab.
Yeah.
I don't want to go away. I've got all these responsibilities to my family.
Right.
I need to provide for them. But of course I wasn't.
Right.
And I don't want that
Don't they call
from
that justification and
you.
rationalization?
I don't want that from you. All I want is an opportunity to get some money so I can keep going.
Right.
But over time, the house. So my business was getting worse and worse because at a certain point, people just don't want you in their house.
Right.
Right? And you're not responsible. So eventually, like, not only did I give away the career that I had in construction, but I also gave away my own little business, right? The house that we had bought went into foreclosure probably 5 times, okay? I filed bankruptcy with the first one, right? Then I filed another bankruptcy, right? Because I had to keep the sheriff's sale away.
Right.
By the time I got to the third one, my lawyer, who was a friend of mine in Yeadon, Murnahan was his name. God bless him and rest his soul. Said, you might as well just file this yourself and save paying me the money. I mean, you've been down this road. So the third, fourth, and fifth time, I filed my own bankruptcies, right? And the judge would he'd put me on the payment plans and all this stuff, and I would go for a little while, and then I'd default on them, and then they'd terminate the bankruptcy. I'd be right back where I was again. Frank Murnahan, that was his name. So the house was like in the process of going, like on a regular basis. Okay, my relationship was getting less and less one of love and respect and mutual caring, and more one of. One day I went like, we have nothing in common except using, and 5 children. And this she had been my best friend.
Right.
When I married her, and I love her dearly, and I still love her dearly. But the change in our relationships with other people that our addiction brings on, okay? And while I can say that I took a hostage, I won't say that there wasn't that Patty Duke syndrome there of identification where the hostage became a willing participant.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Out of love too. Sometimes.
Out of love too.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things I'm giving away, right? I come home from. I no longer have a job, right? I'm selling drugs, right? And it's funny. I used to say I never sold myself for drugs, but I sold myself cheap because it was like, give me your money, I'll go and do all the danger shit, right?
Take all the risk.
Come back with your stuff and keep just like a little bit to just keep myself going, kind of thing, right? But then, of course, it spiraled from there.
It's the opposite of doing esteemable things.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So I came home one night, right? At this point, I'm carrying guns, right? I had already been robbing dealers, right? I'm carrying guns, thinking I'm a badass, right? I'm a gangster. I was just a scared little puppy up there, way out of my depth, you know. I had people holding me up with like Uzis, you know, various things. I was still building a little bit because I had come to know a guy over in Jersey. Moran was his name, who owned go-go bars and adult bookstores.
Right.
Little Egg Harbor and Wilmington and various places, right? So the next thing I know, I'm remodeling.
They're a little bit. I'm thinking that remodeling the go-go bar and the peep shop is probably a little less scrutinous.
Yes.
Right.
So the next thing I know, right, he's got me like, come on, get in the car. We're going down to pick up some things from some of these other places that he owned, right?
Right.
And like, I don't know. Well, what all they're picking up is bags of cash,
right?
Grocery bags of money, right? Coming back,
They're all
and
cash businesses.
dumping them on the bar and
Right.
counting them out. And something. It's like, Dave, you just go in there and and work, and we'll take care of what's going on back here. Right? It's like, okay, whatever. But I'm getting myself more and more in, right? So I'm in the bar one night, and Willard Moran, who was the old man's son, comes in and he's like, you'll see me on TV tonight. All right? And he had, so John McCullough was the head of Union in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, right? And they were organizing the bartenders in Atlantic City and stuff, but that put them in conflict with other people. And so,
especially any organizing in Atlantic City.
Yes. Well, they were all. Everybody was mobbed up.
I was going to say it's mobbed up hard.
It was mobbed up.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, and it wasn't my only experience with the mob because I also knew like Joey Molino, and stuff like that. But I managed to skirt that stuff, basically skirt it. But so it turned that with the night that he had knocked on, he had poinsettias, knocked on John McCullough's door, and when they opened the door, he killed him, assassinated him right there. And he came at the bar, right? And he said like, I'll be on the news tonight. And And I left, and I thought, man, when he realizes, like he just told us all that he killed
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Now
right?
you're a mark.
My life ain't worth shit.
Yeah. Right.
But my next door neighbor was an organizer and a steward with the painters union.
Right.
And so I went right home and I went next door and I went, look, I got to tell you what I just up with, because if something happens to me,
Right.
at least people will know where to look and why it happened, right? And so that's how I got to. I ended up in the painters union after I got clean, a while after I got
Right.
clean. But that was the beginning of my friendship with Reg Kivlin, who was an awesome man. He was almost like another dad to me.
Right.
Okay, even in my addiction. But anyway, so I'm doing this stuff, and it reaches the point where I can't really do that anymore. So now I'm selling drugs, right? I'm
Right.
robbing people. Red's his brother. We won't get into Tommy. But there was this whole thing. There was a while, retail, you could walk into a store, right? You could pick up something and head for the exit. But before you got there, because you weren't going to be shoplifting, you would take it back to returns. And they would
Right.
give you money for it, as if
Right.
they thought you were bringing it in to return it. Right? So we're doing this whole thing, like over in South Jersey, different places around. And I got popped a couple times and shit. But, like, not me, right? Because I'm getting popped for other things, right? Possession and possession with intent,
Right.
and eventually, like carrying illegal firearms, And then I started getting DUIs. I knocked down several telephone poles. My friend from Drexel used to joke that he was going to get me little brass plaques like this pole bought and paid for by Dave Kaskela. Right? But I walked away from them. Like I was living a charmed life. A life of hell,
But charmed.
but charmed.
Which keeps you going longer.
Right.
Right.
And, like the longest I ever got locked. Jimmy, I was arrested in Philadelphia, Bucks County, Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Delaware County, Camden County. That was the worst. I had knocked down the telephone pole, and they tested me, and I had just a wee bit of alcohol in my system, right? And I was carrying an illegal firearm, and I turned the car over and knocked the pole down, and so when they came, of course, so I'm in the 13th floor of the old criminal justice building in Camden, and that's another whole story to itself, but I got out like 2 days later. People were going like, man, I'm in here for 364 days for a couple of joints. Do you think you're getting out of here? Mm-hmm. I went, yeah, I do. Whatever. Charmed life, okay? And then I came home one night, and at this point, I don't have the legal right to buy firearms.
Right.
So I bought one off the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
I come home late, throw the gun loaded into a drawer in my bedroom, and end up passed out downstairs on the sofa, right? And I come to hearing my 4- and 6-year-olds running down the steps, and the 6-year-old screaming, Brian's hurt, Brian's hurt. And Brian's right behind him, and he's just got blood coming out of him. They'd gone looking for fireworks. And my 4-year-old found my gun, fully loaded, hollow nose bullets, 38 special. And he couldn't make it work, but he handed it to his 6-year-old brother, who shot him accidentally from closer than we are now, 6 feet away, right? In through his upper arm, out through his back. The firehouse was only 2 blocks from my house. And the EMTs got to our house, and they took Brian to Mercy Hospital, which is a mile away, right? And after he was stabilized, they flew him to Children's Hospital. We didn't know if he was going to live. Secondly, if he would ever have the use of his arm again. And after multiple microsurgeries and rehab and everything else, he grew up to be my best ever partner in the construction business. After I got clean, right? But my addiction was so bad that I didn't go to the hospital. I had things to do. I had to get rid of the gun. I had to clean up the blood all over the house. I had things to do. And I didn't go to the hospital. And you would think that maybe that would have been enough, but it wasn't. And so I had become friends with the chief of police, Donnie Molyneux. Well, he was the acting chief. Chuck Trophy had been the chief before that. But Donnie Jr., his son, and my son, oldest son, Seamus, played baseball together, right? And so I was helping coach and things like that. So we knew each other. So he calls me, he goes we're going to have to arrest you, right? But he said, you have enough to deal with right now with your son in the hospital. So it was, I don't know, a Thursday, Friday, something like that. He said, why don't you come down on Monday morning and I'll process you personally. The grace that we're given by other people. Well, at this point, of course, children and youth gets involved.
Yeah,
right?
they're coming.
They're coming. And they say to me, we don't think you're a fit parent. We're going to take custody of your children. And I went, you're right. I'm not. But that admission didn't come from my guilt or remorse. It came almost from a sense of relief because it was one less thing that I had to try to be responsible for. And you look back on those kind of things in retrospect, right? After I got clean and started to do some step work. But my children went to my mother-in-law's, and then we sort of snuck them back. But in the meantime, we're being monitored by children and youth, and I'm going to court for reckless endangerment and, the firearms charges and all of that stuff. And I'm on the school board in Yeadon at the time. Right? I'm on the school board. Delaware County Daily Times, front page picture, right, was not our house, whatever. But the headlines, okay, are school board director's son shot and whatever. And then the story's inside. So we go through the whole court thing. And I've had a lot of my lawyers over the years, but one of the best lawyers I ever had was the pro bono lawyer there,
Right.
who represented me, and the judge who said to me, you don't meet the qualifications for reckless endangerment. You more than meet the qualifications for stupidity.
Ooh, okay.
And for lack of care and responsibility. But he said, I'm gonna dismiss the charges. And the DA jumped up and he said, wait, we want to amend the charges and charge him with endangerment of a child. Well, had they done that, I don't know how long I might have spent in jail.
Right.
Right? But they didn't. And the judge said, you missed your opportunity.
Right.
Right? If you wanted to do that, you should have done it when you charged him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was one more time that I skated. Right? Well, we got our children back, you know, and I'm working with a friend of mine. They're sort of back in the construction thing, and we're working up at the Design House up in Franklin Mill Mall, right? Franklin Mills Mall, right? And we're like on 24/7. We're under pressure on this job, you know, and we're all rocked up, right?
Yeah.
And we're all cranked up.
Right.
And we're drinking heavily to try to balance that out.
Right.
And
The volume control.
yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, I can't do this anymore. And he had been trying to get clean, off and on, in and out of a program, right, for like 12 years. So I was like, okay. And he goes, I'm going back to the program. And I was like, okay. And he said, here's the rest of what we have. And I looked around like, anybody else want to quit? Right? Like, right?
Yeah.
But like 3 days later, Jimmy, I knew
Yeah.
I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
There was no traumatic thing.
Plus, you had that, like him doing that,
Yes.
even though it was 3 days prior, and passing you the poison.
Yes.
To only have you only not only just had somebody pass you the poison, but you just saw the person that you were with surrender.
Yes.
That's powerful too.
That's powerful too. And so, like 3 days later, we had another friend who was working there too.
Mm-hmm.
I gave him the rest of this bag, and it was a big bag of stuff. And he came into the program shortly after that too. So at one point, to me, like my higher power works in ways that I'll never understand, funny
Right.
ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? God's got a sense of humor. My God does anyway, right? That, to me, was a God-given bag of,
I was just gonna say that's one hell of a bag, man.
right, that brought three of us all into recovery at one point. Now, neither one of them are still in the program, right? One, my friend Bill Rome, God rest his soul, is dead. He got cancer. He died. But he was the one that planted the seed, okay? And so, and it was sad because when he died, I didn't want to go to his funeral. We had been estranged. There were a lot of things, right? But I went to his funeral, and his wife, Karen, said to me, she said, you do know that you were his best friend. And I just thought, man, I could have been so much more of a friend. I could have been a better friend. And so I've tried to incorporate that in my recovery over the years. But Bill was going to pick me up for a Wednesday night meeting. Never mind. Anyway,
Yeah.
Right. I know exactly where and when, the day, everything, right? He was going to pick me up and take me to the meeting. So I call him up like Wednesday afternoon, and I go, like, what time are you going to pick me up? And he went, oh, something's come up. I can't go. I can't pick you up. I'm not going. So I went myself. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anything about
Right.
the 12-step recovery
Right.
program.
Right.
Nothing, nada, nothing. It had been suggested to me, children and
Was
youth.
it the Liquid Fellowship at that time?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay. But I walked in, I put my hand up, and I said, I'm an addict. My
Right.
name is Dave.
Right.
This is in the day when the meetings were still, a lot of them were still like long, hour and
Right.
a half meetings.
Right.
So there was a break after And at the break, two people who I had noticed in the meeting, right, both wearing leather jackets. One of them with long hair and a ponytail, Jack. God rest his soul too, he's gone. And his girlfriend, Terry, right? And so we go out, we're all smoking, right? And they hug me and they say, welcome, keep coming back. Right? And Terry was easy to look at. All right. And a beautiful woman. And she had tight jeans on and, the leather jacket and thigh-high boots. And she said, keep coming back. And I went, she wants me. She wants me. Because I had so much to offer at that point,
Yes.
Jimmy.
Yes.
So much to
Yes,
offer.
you were balling, clearly,
Right.
at that point.
So I went to a meeting the next day. Right? I didn't see her. But at that point, I had 24 hours clean. Right? That was a Thursday. So I went to a meeting on Friday. Different meeting. I didn't see her. But at that point, I had 2 days clean. And by the time I saw her next, it was the following Wednesday, I had a week clean. A week clean.
Incredible.
So when people say, like, I think I went for all the wrong reasons, it's like,
Who cares?
there are no wrong
Yeah.
reasons,
Yeah.
right? If you're going, you're probably meant to be there,
Right.
and whatever it takes, right?
Yeah, because clearly my decision-making prowess and the way I see things is screwed up anyway.
It's screwed up.
Whatever it takes to get me there,
Right.
right? Mm-hmm.
So I just kept coming, and I was like working sort of whatever. Bill was using off and on. We were working for this guy called Jim Woods, a construction company out in West Philly, and they had a pool on how long it would be before I was using again. An over-under number that they had set. And God's so good, right? I remember putting my tool belt down in the middle of the day and walking across to, like, that was Market, Chestnut, either Chestnut or Walnut Street, and finding a meeting I'd never been to, I've never been back to, right? But sitting down in it, I was probably the only white guy there, right? It didn't matter. I was welcome, right? And that got me another day, right? And so I thought I was off to a great start. But you know what they say about obsession when obsession meets, opportunity meets whatever. So about 3 months clean, because it was June 20, whatever, was the first day that I had gone to a meeting and had gotten clean. October, I'm heading out of my street in Yaden. I get down to whatever it is that goes across. And instead of turning right and going to the Alden meeting, I turned left. 5 minutes later, I'm at 58 in Whitby, and I'm getting it on. And I just go like, what happened? What happened?
Decision. Somewhere.
And I knew I couldn't keep going. That was my relapse. 5 minutes. Because I used, and I left there and went right to Alden. To the meeting. High as a kite. And I've been clean ever since. But I didn't tell anybody that I had used, right? Like 3 years later, I told my sponsor, I used, I've got to get honest with you, I used. And he goes, well, come back. I went, no, it wasn't like I just used.
We just got to move my my claim on my clean date is different than the one I've
Right,
been
than
claiming.
the one I've been claiming, right? So, but I waited to tell him until we were way up in the Poconos. We were on our way to go skiing because I figured even my sponsor, who I know loves and cares for me, isn't enough of an asshole to put me out here because of the fact that I used at some point and I didn't get honest with him. He laughed and he went like, "So when were you actually clean?" I went, "I don't know. Sometime in the first 2 weeks of October."
Right.
And he said, "Well then, why don't you just
Pick a day.
pick a date?" So I picked October 15th.
Right.
I know I'd been clean for some amount of time before that.
Right.
I don't know when. And I've been clean ever since. Right.
Right.
And that was in 1993. It was a funny story with my sponsor. Like I had known him when we were both using.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into the lights come on slowly in my world, right?
Mine too.
I ran into him at a meeting, and I went, "What are you doing here, Pete?" And he went, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to get clean." And he went, "Well, I'm trying to stay clean."
Mm-hmm.
And I went, like, this is the most intelligent man I've ever met. And I asked him to be my sponsor. And he was my sponsor for the first 12 years of my recovery. And then he forgot the things he had taught me.
Mm. Yeah. Not something we get, it's something we do.
Something we do.
Mm-hmm.
And he had stopped doing, but he had, during that time, had taken me through the 12 steps. Slow, a slow learner, probably about a step a year when you average it all out. And people go, "Oh, you finished the 12 steps." Like, are you kidding me? Oh, no, I've hardly started.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All I've done is gone through them formally
The
with
formal,
a sponsor.
Right. Yeah, the heavy lifting is learning how to live it.
Is learning how to live it.
Mm-hmm.
So, more things that most people don't know. Over the next 3 years, I struggled to find a new sponsor. I didn't struggle. I failed to surrender. But I asked a couple people because I thought we had certain things in common. Things happened, and I went like, "Yeah, this ain't gonna work." All right, so I'm bouncing around a little bit. And then I realized that what I really needed in a sponsor was entirely different at 15 years clean than what I needed in a sponsor with 30 days clean.
So say more about what you perceived you needed was different, because you said you realized. What do you think you needed that Pete left, forgot,
I tried.
went back out.
I tried a couple of other people.
Right. What did you think you needed?
I needed somebody whose life I knew the program had totally changed.
Okay.
Okay? Somebody who had a real spiritual basis in their life. Somebody who had serenity in their life.
Right.
Somebody who had compassion and empathy.
Right.
And so I asked Terry,
Mm-hmm.
who'd been at my first meeting,
No kidding, really?
to be my sponsor. And she said, "Let me ask my sponsor." Right? Because I said I couldn't have done this 10 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe not a year ago, but you exemplify all the qualities, personal qualities that I would like to emulate. So she asked her sponsor, who was at the last meeting last night.
Does that happen very often? Was that, because you hear men with men, women
Oh,
with
that
women,
was,
women?
no. I won't say I was totally a groundbreaker,
Right.
but it was not common at all.
Now,
But-
was some of her concern when she talked to her sponsor whether or not it was okay because you were a man?
I think so.
Right?
Yes.
How did your wife feel about it? Did she know you were going to choose a female sponsor? Did she know that you thought she was hot when you first saw her?
These are all questions I can't answer because I'm not my wife.
Yeah,
but,
right.
but here's the thing, okay? So when I had gotten clean, right?
Sorry for the pointed question.
No. So when I had gotten clean, basically everything I had given away.
Right.
Including my relationship with my wife. But
Right.
I hadn't given away the fact of the relationship.
Right. The infrastructure behind it.
Right.
You were still married,
Yes.
right?
The
You know what I
whole
mean? You were just
quality.
a shell.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Over time, okay, a restoration of things in my life has been not only of my sanity, relatively,
Right.
certainly of my spirituality,
Right.
right, but also of every other thing that was of value in my life.
Well, it's all tied to your spiritual
It's
condition.
it
So,
is.
you know what I mean? Like that's the thing that most people don't realize is, you know, they say the steps are the solution, but they don't say to what? Because the steps are the fucking solution to everything.
Right.
Right. It's the infrastructure you build your entire life on.
Right.
But I never realized that.
So anyway, so yes, my wife does know that my sponsor was a woman.
Right.
She also knows that probably I had drug-induced hangover fantasies
Right.
in the beginning.
Right. Of course.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I have so much to offer. Right? But at my 25th, so when my
Is Terry still with us?
Terry is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Terry lives in Jersey. She's still my sponsor.
Is she really?
Yeah.
Ah, that's a really cool story.
And her sponsor was at our meeting last night. I mentioned who it was when she shared because she had recently lost her husband.
Oh, she was the one that was moving.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's her sponsor.
No kidding.
Both of them were at my very first ever meeting.
Get the fuck out of here.
And 31 years later, they're still like my sponsor. And Cindy
grand sponsor.
is my grand sponsor. Right? She's Terry's
Dude,
sponsor.
what a cool story.
Right? I mean, God, I couldn't script this.
Is this this mysterious way shit they talk about?
Well, listen, if I wrote a story,
right,
and I've thought about it sometimes,
right,
nobody would believe it,
right.
Nobody would believe it. Like, like all this stuff didn't happen to you, right?
Wow.
But we talk about dancing on a volcano. When I'm in North Philly one night, right? Waiting to do a deal. Like, I was there so much. I had an orange Jeep with a green door that was in North Philly so much that nobody looked at it like it didn't belong there.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The cops, everybody. But I'm in North Philly. I'm waiting to do my thing with a guy, right? And I'm outside a bar, and he puts up a finger to me like 1 minute, and he walks across the street, the corner across the street, right? Car pulls up, guy jumps out, bam, bam, with a shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My friend runs across the street, in the front door of the bar. He was dead on his feet.
Right.
Out the back door of the bar and collapsed there. It's maybe, 2 o'clock in the morning or something, right? And I think, like, had I been standing on that corner with him,
Yeah, you would have got smoked.
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
All of that. One of many times when my life was, but I put myself in total jeopardy. And for whatever reason, my higher power carried me through when I had nothing to bring me to the point, where I was willing to surrender.
Well, it's funny because I saw your tattoo when we first sat down that says "Too Damn Lucky," and I thought to myself, you know what I mean? Like that's my story too. And then over time, hearing the somewhere in the literature, not just lucky.
But see, that's
Right.
only one of the two. I got these tattoos last year.
Okay, too damn lucky. And what's the other one?
So
say?
damn lucky.
So damn lucky.
My,
and then what's the other
Dave
one? say?
Masters reference, right?
Okay, there we go.
God's grace and mercy.
Right, there we go.
Because that has made everything else possible.
Right. Right. It's not just luck.
I was never lucky.
Yes.
I was a creature of grace. Unmerited favor, I think, is the...
Yeah, you know what? Like, funny that it didn't come out of my mouth last night, but, you know, I don't know what God is. Like, I use the term God loosely just to define what I can't define. It's just easier than continuing to say a power greater than me.
Right.
But God conspires in my favor for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I see the evidence of it everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? Wow.
So, anyway, over time, of course, my children, my oldest was 16 when I got clean. And then they were 5, 7, 9, 11, and 16.
Right.
The older ones had more exposure to what was going on, but not totally. When they see and hear this, they're going to go like, well, what the fuck? Right? But it is what it is, because whatever the reason I'm here today, okay, I know that I have the ability to share what God has done in my life. However I choose to define him or not define him. And I can't define God.
Right.
You said last night, it's like, you know, like a grasshopper tried, did you find the guy stepping on him or walking past or whatever, my relationship with God. But I do believe that power that brought me, that carried me through my life until I came into recovery and has carried me every day since, okay, is loving, is all powerful, okay, it's greater than myself and it's greater than my addiction. Now it's just like, I love music. Here we go, we could digress again, okay. For the longest time, and I heard you and Joel talk about The Wall. Okay. Yeah. For the longest time, that Pink Floyd album was my favorite Pink Floyd album. And then I heard the recording of Roger Waters at The Wall in Berlin.
Right. When they took down the wall.
And the song at the end was Tear Down the Walls. It wasn't on the album.
Right.
I had never heard that.
Right.
And I went, that's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing in Narcotics Anonymous. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
You can edit that out.
Well,
that's what I've been doing all this time, is tearing down the wall, right? And I came to understand that my favorite Pink Floyd album is not The Wall. It's Wish You Were Here.
Yeah.
I love that album, right?
Yeah, I love that song.
That album. My taste in music has changed. Not my first Grateful Dead concert, because that was very early, but my son's first Grateful Dead concert was at Englishtown, New Jersey, Labor Day weekend of 1977. He was 15 months old. He's still a huge Grateful Dead fan. We go to shows to watch Dead and Company, whatever, all this. But my favorite artist now, because I find much more in what he writes and says, is Dave Matthews.
Right.
And my third oldest son, Brian, who was the one that was shot, became my business partner. The only, and I've had multiple business partners over the years, right?
Right.
The only one that cared as much as I did. The only one that worked as hard as I did. And the only one that was 100% honest. Man, you don't find partners like that.
Something about family.
Right? And then we're rebuilding houses down at the Jersey Shore right after Hurricane Sandy. By the time we got to the third house in an extended family, he had become quite friendly with the granddaughter, right, who was right about his age. And the next thing I knew, I lost a business partner, but I gained a daughter-in-law, and eventually another grandchild. Right. So
how many grandkids do you have now?
I have 10, 5 children, 10 grandchildren. They're not evenly dispersed, but it doesn't matter,
okay.
Right?
Doesn't matter.
I love every one of them so much. Like I said that recovery gave me the opportunity to have those children that were taken away by children and youth become my 5 best friends in the world.
Mm.
But I now have told them that you're my 5 almost best friends in the world.
Because you got grandkids.
Because
now.
I have 10 grandchildren.
Yeah, and grandkids.
And
grandkids are like a trump card.
It's just that unconditional love,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the ability to redo. Like, we can't go back and change the past,
Mm-hmm.
but we get second chances in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, do we have any time?
Yeah, a couple more minutes.
A couple more minutes. Okay. When
Got to take another piss break soon, though.
When my one granddaughter was born, she was born addicted.
Okay.
Okay. And children and youth, of course, got involved.
Right.
And they wanted to take the custody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I said, no. I said, no, we'll be responsible. And they went, you can't be responsible for that child. You're a child abuser. And I went, what do you mean? And they went, we have you listed in Harrisburg as a child abuser from when your son was shot. And I went, I didn't shoot him.
Right.
I said, I was exonerated in court. And it was more than 20 years of recovery ago.
Mm.
Right? And I said, we will fight you in court. And we did.
Mm.
And they gave us full custody of my granddaughter while my daughter was still struggling, looking for the surrender necessary to come back to the program that she had been in at one point, very young, and needed to come back to.
Well, she had not only the experience of being immersing herself at least temporarily in the fellowship, but your example as well.
Well, and she tells me that when she's feeling sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
Other times she tells me, yeah, we let my dad live with me. My dad and my mom live with me, even though it's our house, right? But we all live together, and it's a beautiful thing. But so it's not about the material stuff I've been given, Jimmy, because in those couple of years, custody, first with children and youth, then with the father of my granddaughter, whatever. We spent like $80,000 in lawyer bills, right? And it was worth every penny. But what's come out of that in her recovery, because she and her husband just celebrated 7 years clean.
Fond of both of them, by the way.
In March, right? 7 years, what a miracle. But they have both learned to co-parent because of their 4 children. One was his with someone else, and one was hers with someone else, and 2 are theirs. But they're all theirs, right?
Right.
And the other 2 parents co-parent so well with my daughter and her husband. It's like that the 4 of them, there is no formal custody agreements anymore.
Right.
Right?
They just worked it all
Everything
out.
is shared.
Right.
It all works out. And I mean, this is the gift that recovery has given me. Right? So children and youth allowed us to take full custody of my granddaughter until such time as her father and his family and my daughter and us were able to provide her that stable environment, you know. So I couldn't go back and change things, but I was given an opportunity for a do-over. Man.
Wow.
Man.
Impressive.
So,
Incredible.
Just one more thing, I think. I've tried to make living amends to everyone in my family over the years. All right? And I thought I had done enough. And I probably had about 13 years clean or something. And I went to my wife And I said, I just want you to know how much I regret and how sorry I am for all the pain and harm I caused in your life. And she said, thank you. You've never said that. Because I thought that the amends I was making by living different were enough.
The admission of wrongdoing by saying you were wrong
Yes.
is so powerful and so often not something that's exercised by others.
Right.
It's one of the most powerful things that I've learned in the process is to, and we talk about like the 10-step talks about promptly, but nobody ever really defined what promptly is.
My sponsor did. He said, as promptly as you are able, as
Right.
promptly as you become willing. But anyway, I didn't mean to
Or
jump in.
or even that sometimes that comes with a level of awareness too. Ability and awareness tie together. You know what I mean? Like, as time's going on, we talked about this last night, that the words come to, right? Come to believe, come to accept, right? And there's something else like coming to a level of awareness, right? You know what I mean? And I don't think we give that much its due, right? You know what I mean? There's a maturity in recovery, and that's why I watch, guys like you know what I mean? Because I can't see my fucking self coming, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's why I can't see the fucking forest through the trees, right? That's why I need others. But there's also, within that, you know what I mean? Like the external, like other people that know me and can call me out on my own shit or point out where I'm off or those type of things. And then there's some things like like there's a level of unfolding,
Yes.
right? You know what I mean? That's happening, and deeper exploration. You know what I mean? And peeling back layers over and over again, and all these. Like, I was going to wear this different shirt that said, it says AH on it, squared or whatever. It's like the element of surprise. It's like, it looks like an element. I was going to wear that today. I don't know why I didn't, but the some surprise is external, right? You know what I mean? Like, oh, look, oh, wow, oh, yeah, oh, and sometimes it's like, oh, shit, it's inside, right? You know what I mean? And you said it in the beginning, the importance of continuing to keep coming back, right? You know what I mean? And the importance of continuing to stay in the process is that I keep getting granted all these additional freedoms. And some of those freedoms come from painful truths.
Yes.
Right? But there's power in painful truths, because if I can manage to sustain myself through the discomfort, leaning into a power greater than me and the we that surrounds me that helps me stand through that, I can get to the other side and actually get an opportunity to continue to make a living amends in ways that I never anticipated. This program, for what it's worth, is one of my living amends.
Yes.
Right? It's a way for me to be able to, have really powerful conversations like the one we just had. And, wow. Like, we totally danced around the volcano, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
But the volcano itself is the heat, but the dance is what you shared afterwards. You know what I mean? Your relationship with your children, your relationship with your grandchildren, achieving a certain level of material success, although, outlining that that's not, as important. And the impact that you have in other people's lives, including mine. I love and appreciate you.
Thank you, Jimmy. I love you
This
too.
was fucking fantastic.
It was.
So that's how we dance on the volcano, peeps, just so you know. And I think that's the way we close out this episode.
Thank you so much for asking me, Jimmy.
I love you,
inviting me here.
Love you. Give me a fist pound, because that's how we do it. There we go. Dancing on a Volcano, Season 2, Episode 5. Come watch us. More episodes coming soon. That's all I got. Thanks, man.
Jimmy, thank you.
What do you think?
Wow.